Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.
At this juncture, I'd like to call upon our last panel discussant, Honorable Fred Mukasa Mbidde.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, our speaker, PAP, our chief guest, I do not know whether chief or substantive, Right Honorable Mama Rebecca Kadanga. I obtain a lot of inspiration from you. I welcome you. Bishop Mapong, we have never met. I have consistently seen, read, and heard from you. I can assure you, I take a lot of admiration for your works that you are doing. I am Mukasa Mbidde. My colleagues, the panelists, I can see both the political and academic consanguinity within the audience. I equally take cognizance of your presence here. I do not know, by the time I arrived here and I see some of the people here, of course laughing, I found a critique of the English language. And of course I am known here in Uganda for being a bit bravely okay when it comes to the English language. But you see, you will agree with me. When a child pretends to be dead, all you have to do is also to pretend to be burying that child. That is when you will now realize that it wants to wake up. And that is what we are doing to Africa by being fluent, extremely fluent and magniloquent in the English language. That is when we shall create a language that is acceptable to all and sundry of the African people. I can tell you, it is extremely inconceivable. I come from a country called Uganda, which sings our national anthem in English. Despite that, obviously, only 20 to 30% of Ugandans can comprehend what it means. But I'm fine. So if you pretend to be dead, we shall pretend to be burying you. That is when we shall definitely realize that you need to be alive in the circumstances. Africa. First of all, I would like to recognize that I am happy, having been invited, first of all, to pair with a panel that is extremely felicitous, with a pedigree of discourse that, in my opinion, is promotional in nature. Number two, discussing Africa. As a Pan-African, a lot of people, by the way, think that being African qualifies you to being a Pan-African. Some people even think that being a Pan-African president, an African president qualifies you for being a Pan-African. In my opinion, that is not the case. If this is a revolution that consists and instead seeks to consolidate the solidarity of persons with African descent, it is your actions that will definitely tell you that you are Pan-African, other than just the kind of office you occupy within the circumstances. So most of the African presidents are actually not Pan-African. That is why Africa doesn't need prayers, because it has been a node. All that we need is the prayers for the leaders of Africa, because that is where actually we went wrong in the equation. When you look at leaders in Africa, 2 times 2 is not 4. Where factors in the equation are human beings and leaders in Africa, that does not qualify as a numerical equation. Africa does not sail without history. What are we? 54 sovereign states. We have a GDP of 2.8 trillion United States dollars, if of course obviously World Bank figures of last year are to be considered as material. Less than India's 3.9 trillion. But what is our history? By 1962, Africa had a GDP of close to 60 to 70 billion US dollars, bigger than India's 39 billion US dollars over that time, and bigger than USA 3.8 billion US dollars over that time. Now that means, if you think Africa is growing by partnering with all and sundry in Europe, then obviously you are telling me that you have got a very great sense of humor. Because by 1962, we are better than actually what we are today. Today, the United States is 29.7 trillion. US dollars by GDP, and I can tell you, GDP has nothing material to do with the nationals of that country, because it is a gross domestic product. When we are being taught economics, we are told that gross domestic product is the total money value of goods and services produced in an economy, not necessarily by nationals of that economy, meaning what actually United States is enjoying is not being produced by the Americans themselves only. Now that is where the question is. Even with the presence of the African Free Continental Trade Area, why is it that of the first 100 global companies, at least by market capitalization measurement, no African country exists on the list? Why? When we have presidents that are actually dubbed Pan-African in nature, why should companies not merge? Lawyers, I am seeing lawyers here. Some of us are actually proficient in mergers and acquisitions in Uganda as practice areas, as lawyers. We don't see companies merging and acquiring. In fact, we have just recently passed the Competition Act in Uganda, but we had companies that merged without actual recourse to the effect such a merger without a regulatory procedure has on consumers in Uganda. But we are okay. We are led by a Pan-Africanist. So, when I am discussing the issue that I was told to discuss, how Africa should adopt a single passport, what is the history of the adoption of that single passport for Africa? What is it? When it was outed in 2016, I think that is around 10 years ago, everybody, actually including all of us, we thought Africa is now heading to the best direction. Little did we know that up to today, it is only presidents, some diplomats, and a few permanent secretaries that actually have the passport. So they are actually endowed with the free movement within the East African continent, yet they actually did not face travel processes restrictions. So in effect, it was given to those that did not need it and restricted against those that actually fancied what it should have done. So our leaders are tainted with the big money syndrome. They are so huge, even when you see them moving, you may think they are actually shifting. They carry everything, they move along. We used to think that it is actually because of what their fears are. In terms of emergencies, that they create convoys. If you fear that we are likely to face some kind of terrorism activities, obviously a president will move with a few guns. If the president, for example, has grown beyond what would have been expected, you may find that actually an ambulance would escort, but when a president moves with a toilet, then you know there is also a problem of emergencies that are incalculable. So I am saying, why would we have an African passport only to be given to those that actually don't need it? I shudder. If anybody would tell me that there would have been a restriction of any president or minister to enter a specific country within Africa for either trade or other purposes. So if that doesn't exist, then what exists? That creates the logical possibility for you only to restrict an African passport to those that actually do not need it, or in fact those who issue it. When you look at the regional economic communities, in Africa we have got 8, but only 4 of those are succinct on the possibility of regional integration. Most of them are grappling over the science of economic community, economic integration, markets, and only for the East African community, for example, the COMESA, they gloss over, and I am saying glossing over because I know they create regional integration as a last limb that usually is never achievable. Because achieving regional integration includes ceding, first of all, power, ceding sovereignty, but we have leaders that can't give power even to their own children. So we know they cannot voluntarily cede the power to a next leader. There is a problem. They are tainted with what we call the honorific abilitudinity. The existence of extreme honorableness, hubris. They are so big that for you to advise them, most likely you are treading a slippery ground. And that's what we have read on the African continent. Africans are completely different from their leaders. Even when we are discussing integration ideas, when we are discussing market integration, but our people are usually already there. We are only discussing for the sole purpose of creating documentation to validate their activities. So they are different. The people we lead differ from the leaders, even in terms of thinking. When we are trying to admit South Sudan here in the East African Community integration process, particularly in regards to the three major limbs, the fifth limb of political federation, that one I think is a logical impossibility. Everybody was saying, what are you merging? Why are you bringing Somalia? Why are you bringing South Sudan? The question would be, for us lawyers in Uganda, we had already received extreme instructions that were towards the possibility that how would we now achieve the enforcement of trade relations, trade agreements that had been violated between Ugandans and South Sudanese. The question is, there was no court to try any eventual breaches of such. Until, of course, obviously, when you admit them into the fold of the East African Community, that therefore their matters would be the subject of resolution by the East African Community Court of Justice. Now that is where the problem lies. That leaders are so sluggish that usually they find the people they lead already in the area only to address them on things they know, but they put them in language that sometimes, of course, our population don't understand. So, respect for treaty obligations. I'm trying to run as fast as possible. Ugandans and Africans per se are extremely quick at appending signatures to treaties without definitely following up on what the obligations are under those treaties. As an advocate of courts of judicature, I have been arguing with the states. There was a time I sued Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, and most of the states were arguing sovereignty as one of the defenses against fulfillment of the obligations under the East African Community Treaty. Appending a signature to a regional treaty is an act of sovereignty. So you cannot turn around and argue sovereignty as a defense against fulfillment of the requirements of the obligations. You look at all these leaders, they give sublime speeches, very brilliant speeches, when they go to everywhere, beginning with those that existed before we were born at Lancaster. They spoke about a lot of good things. Now, the requirement for following treaties for which you have appended the signatures is actually 100%. That is enshrined under the principle of Pacta Sunt Servanda and under Article 26 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. Lawyers can understand. So these violators here say they are leaders, they are Pan-Africanists, but they do less. Why? Free movement within Africa is enshrined under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. African leaders have appended signature to that charter that emanates from the Banjul. There is no enforcement procedure when it comes to Uganda. That one I can tell you. If your rights are violated, you cannot go to the African Court on Human and People's Rights. I am happy because my mama is here. I know she usually forces things to happen. So the Attorney General should have deposited a declaration allowing Ugandans before the African Court on Human and People's Rights to allow them to sue in that court. We know what our courts do here. At least let us sue away. From away, you know. Because we do not want guided decisions when the rights of persons are under question. We want decisions that at least, because I know I have ever sued, I became a member of parliament subject to a petition that I lodged before the East African Court against Uganda. I love Mama because she's a speaker that implemented a decision that was against Uganda, which saw me elected. So I can tell you, today, I had to sue 4 countries for orders that they should deposit that declaration. The court said, well, we have got jurisdiction to try this matter. It is very likely that we can order partner states into acceding to decisions of that nature. So African leaders are not Pan-African. That is the major problem. So it remains apodictic for you to expect that precincts that require Pan-Africanism can be achievable by those that are actually against the spirit of Pan-Africanism in nature. Therefore, in Uganda and Africa, we are dealing with a major problem. And I want to explore this little problem for you to determine whether now we shall get a passport that allows free movement. When actually in Africa, what we are dealing with now is statelessness. So those that you wanted to move freely are actually now even declared stateless. I have looked at documentation of research in Malawi. South Africa is actually dealing with their stateless person is coming from Lesotho and from Botswana. They have been referred to as the Lesotho and the Swana, and they have adopted a principle of citizenship that is in such a way that where you are born is where you are a citizen by birth. In Uganda, for you to prove that you are a citizen, it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with your parents and grandparents. And by the way, under Article 10 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, even that is not enough. There must be proof of documentation ranging from 1926, when we know very few books had arrived in Uganda for registration.
And as we wrap up, please.
So as I wrap up, statelessness now is eating into the possibility of free movement. It is actually establishing that there is a possibility of criminality if you cannot prove things that are actually not easily provable. In that regard, my conclusion would be that I think we shall now need to unfasten the tie that we have made. The knot is wrong. We should unfasten it, and a new beginning should emanate from those that have got minds buttressed here and now. I thank you very much.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.